All right, so now we're to slide 11, and we're going to talk about the first of our metrics, which is relative native plant community composition. And the definition for this metric is it's the abundance of native versus exotic plant communities in the sample area. So we really want to know, is this sample area mostly native plants, mostly exotic plants, or some mix of native and exotics? And why do we care about this? We care about this because usually when you've got a high percentage of native plants as dominance in your community, that you'll have higher biotic diversity, you'll have better wetland, the wetland communities are more stable, you're going to have better wildlife habitat, especially for native species who are often dependent on those native plants, and you should have increased species diversity, because a lot of time when you get really exotic dominated communities, they drive down the diversity. Whereas when you do have that high, if you have a community that's mostly dominated by non-native species, it tends to indicate either that the wetland has been disturbed or the hydrology's been messed with, or something else has happened to cause the native species to go away and the exotic species to be able to take over. So remember when we were filling in worksheet 6, we had that raw community type score. So the way we went through this to make life simpler for you, we didn't want, it's not rapid assessment if you go out and you list every single species that's out there and you're looking around, that's very high level precise work, and we do that sometimes, but not for rapid assessment. So to simplify that as much as possible, we got to that list of 6 species that you put in your community types. What are our 2 most common tall woodies, what are our 2 most common short woodies, and what are our 2 most common herbaceous species? And then to get a raw score of that, of how native or not native, to get it onto our scale of 1, 2, 3, 4, we went through every possible combination you could have of 2 tall woodies, 2 short woodies, and 2 herbaceous, where they could be either native or exotic. And we, using our understanding of what's important about how those plant communities are constructed, we gave them a rating from 1 to 4 on if you have 2 native trees and 2 native short woodies and 2 exotic grasses, we gave that a rating, and every other possible combination where you had 1 native tree and 1 non-native tree, etc. And that's what this list is, this relative native plant community list that's on slide 12, is all the different combinations. Now, if you're using the activated data sheets, you don't have to even think about this. The activated data sheet will do it all for you, just based on whether you put an N or an E after each of your species that you list. And it even knows what to do if you put in a U or you don't have a certain strata, like you don't have short woodies. But if for some reason you're filling this in by hand, you have this in your reference sheets and in the field guide, and you can look at it and determine whether you have what your raw native plant community score is. And the top ones are for all the ones that have tall woodies, all the different possible combinations of tall woodies, native or exotic or mixed, and whether they have, a short woody and whether they have herbaceous. And then the middle set of columns is for shrubby, or for short woody, not shrubs, because we're not worrying about whether, short trees are still short woodies. Baby trees are still short woodies. If they're under 20 feet tall, even if they're cottonwoods, they're short woodies for the RAM. So any of the short woody, if you just have a short woody strata and an herbaceous, we have those raw scores in the middle. And then if you just have herbaceous strata, it's very simple. You either have 2 exotics or 1 exotic, or you have an exotic and a native, or you have 2 natives. And so there's only 3 options there. And then we also gave you an option if you have you can have a polygon that's just bare ground for some reason, either because somebody drove a bulldozer through your sample area, or because you're standing on a gravel bar. And so we still need to be able to calculate your relative native plant community composition, and so we gave you ratings there too. If you have a bare gravel bar that's natural river sediment, that gets a 4. If you have a bare area because somebody drove their SUV through it, then that's a 1. So that's how you would get that if you, for some reason, don't have activated data sheets. So you filled in that worksheet 6 with these raw scores from your species that you've recorded. You've estimated the sample area percent of the polygons percent of the sample area for each community type. And you've got all of that data on worksheet 6. So we're going to slide 13 now. And this is your filled in, finished, your finished plant community composition worksheet. And you've got all your data there to calculate now your relative plant community composition weighted score for the whole sample area, because you have all of those weighted scores in that final column and you just add them up. And as long as you have 100% of your sample area accounted for, you didn't account for 110% or 90%, you will get a number there that's between 1 and 4. And you will take that number to the ratings table, which is table B1. So you will take, on slide 14, you will take that summed up weighted score for your plant community composition, and you will go to work to table B1. And since in our example, our summed up score for the final weighted score was 3.35. And you go to table 1 and you can see 3.35 fits into the category for a rating of 3 because it's between 3.25 and 3.75. And you can also see that we've given you a description because remember we designed the raw ratings to help to based on whether you have native or how many native or exotic species you have. And we did that with the assumption that to be an A site, a site needs to be less than 10% exotic dominated. And so the rating scale, you'll see at 50% non-native, you're now a D or a 1. So we've definitely designed this to be weighted towards being very strongly native to get a high score on this. And that's done on purpose. That wasn't done accidentally. So we are now done with our relative native plant community composition.